Hello, everyone. This video will go over the last part of Chapter 9, which talks about how to properly use transitions as well as descriptions and examples within the body of a story. Now, transitions help you move from one part to the next. Without transitions, it's hard to connect ideas through natural progression of thought. So you're going to want to relate new ideas to ones previously expressed for the sake of clarity, and so that someone who is not familiar with the story can follow along with you in a very logical way. So transitions are really keywords, signposts that prevent choppy, jumpy, or abrupt writing and promote your piece having a flow or a pattern to it that provides signposts along the way to let the reader know where you're going and show how ideas are related to one another. A lot of readers will have trouble following organization or a train of thought for a writer. And so if you write the way that you think, if you write in chunks and paste it together, or you're working with multiple writers, the trouble is it's sometimes hard for your writing to feel like one piece. So transitions will help you do that. It's important to note that some transitions are prepositions. So just because I'm using prepositions as transitions doesn't mean that they're not still prepositions. So things like in would still be a preposition, but they're being used for the purpose of transitions. So don't get confused in terms of the tool of transitions versus the grammatical use of prepositions. Now you can use transitions in three ways. The first is between sections. So let's imagine that you have a newspaper article and they have those like bolded subheadings. Those big sections of a piece need to be connected in some way. So you can't just jump from topic to topic. You need to show how they're interrelated. So you would use transitions between those sections to show the ways that they are connected. You also need to do this between paragraphs. So even if you're not separating out two topics into broad sections, you need to make sure that your different paragraphs are following a logical train of thought. And one of the ways to do that is through the use of transitions. Even within paragraphs, you need to make sure that your writing makes sense as the reader is reading it for the first time. This is why it's sometimes important when you're writing a piece and you're really heavily involved and you kind of know all the details, to get someone who has fresh eyes, like an editor, to look at your piece to make sure that it makes sense to someone who doesn't already have familiarity with the story. So here's an example of the use of transitions. People use 43 muscles when they frown. They use 28 muscles when they smile. While these two sentences are not bad sentences, they're written grammatically, they're written correctly in terms of grammar. The problem is you kind of get lost with the numbers. It's hard to tell why this information is connected. So with the addition of simple transitional words, you can make it a little more clear what you're trying to get at. Here, you're really using a comparison between the number of muscles used when you frown and when you smile. So while people use 43 muscles when they frown, they only use 28 muscles when they smile. So here I'm providing the reader with transitions to show how these two sentences are really connected to one another. Here's another example. Deciding on a college is often a difficult decision for students. Most school counselors try to provide students with different resources. They include assessments and college brochures. Counselors need to provide students with more resources in order to help them make a more informed decision about what college to attend. Again, not bad writing, but it could be hard to follow this train of thought or to even keep the reader's attention because it's so much information in one paragraph that you kind of start to wander in your mind as you're reading along. Signpost or transition words will help your reader to stay focused. Deciding on a college is often a difficult decision for students. Therefore, Most school counselors try to provide students with different resources, such as assessments and college brochures. However, counselors need to provide students with more resources in order to help them make a more informed decision about what college to attend. This kind of signpost what the reader needs to be looking out for, and provide kind of a preview of what the sentence is going to provide. When you provide therefore, you know you're drawing some conclusion about the information. You're showing a relationship. When you say such as, you're about to describe or give examples of something. However, suggests that you're about to contradict something that you just previously said. So you can see how providing these signposts makes it a little more clear what we're talking about. So there are many types of transition words. The first indicate time. There is a long list provided here of those time transition words, which you can look up either in your textbook or on websites about transition words. But the importance of these is to show a chronological order of something, which is how our brain usually processes information from beginning to end. You can also indicate addition for something. So this would be if you're describing one thought and you want to add to that thought with additional evidence or another example of something, then you're going to provide an addition transition word. If you need to indicate causation in a relationship, you would also use a transition. So consequently, so if I say that, you know, when X happens, Y happens, consequently, if Y happens, then X happens, right? And so you're kind of showing how those different sentences are connected and the relationships between them. In order to indicate comparison or contrast, transitions are very helpful. So you're showing whether the information in the previous sentence and the next sentence, or previous paragraph and the next paragraph, if you're continuing to compare and show how something is similar, use those comparison transition words to show that you're adding on to the information that you have. If you're trying to contrast or show difference between the first and second item, then you're going to want to use a contrasting transition, which allows the reader to know, hey, they're about to refute the information previously given. Other key things that we need to think about as writers is how to explain the unfamiliar. So remember, we're really writing between a 3rd and 8th grade level. So that means a 10-year-old should be able to read your work and understand it. And that goes with even the most complicated stories out there, right? Including like very detailed health information. It should be written so that every single person reading it can really understand it. So you're going to want to avoid jargon, which are those professional terms that only someone familiar with an industry would really understand. And you're going to want to define words that aren't typical. So if you have to use something that isn't easy to understand, you're providing a definition of it. Here's an example. When I was working for the American Heart Association, I had doctors that would call a heart attack a clinical terminal cardiac arrhythmia. Now, if you say that, how many people are really going to understand that that's a heart attack? Instead, it's better to use the common word of heart attack to explain this. Or if I'm going to use the clinical term, then I need to define it as a heart attack, something that people can understand. One of the things I think a lot of writers struggle with is the use of numbers. I think when we write down a number, we expect anything large to have a very big impact, such as heart disease kills over 363,000 people in America every year. Now that's a large number, but because it's so large, it's hard for our brain to really understand the reach or the meaning of that large term. So instead, we need to help the audience understand what that really means. So that's more than 3 times the number of people that can fit inside Bryant-Denny Stadium. Now, do you have an image of your mind of how many people die from heart disease every year? I think when we use these descriptive terms to explain numbers, it really makes a larger impact than when we just use the numbers alone. So this is one way to make statistics or numbers really come to life. You also want to use examples to make information personal and meaningful. Again, when I was working for the American Heart Association, we had a campaign that was devoted to congenital heart disease, which is a common birth defect. And I had access to all of these wonderful statistics that show a real impact of CHD. But I found people related to the stories of people who had dealt with CHD and had to deal with things like having a heart transplant at the age of 2, like Gabby here on the right did, or having a little girl, Hannah, who is waiting on a new surgery to repair her heart, right? These make the problem of CHD come to life. It makes it personal, it makes it meaningful to you, and it tends to make your readers care more about it. So find ways that you can use examples of real people and stories to personalize the information that you have. You also want to describe the unfamiliar with more familiar terms. So if you're talking about a mutual fund scandal, which is kind of out of the reach of the capacity, not really the capacity, but the current understanding of the general public, you're going to want to use something that they do understand, such as you're selling your house and your real estate agent claims he's representing your interests, but he sells the property less than fair value to a friend who resells it at a substantial profit on which the agent receives a kickback. You complain to the county attorney, but he gets big campaign contributions from the agent, so he does not pay it attention. That, in essence, is how we reach the mutual fund scandal at hand. So instead of trying to describe this complicated system of mutual funds, which most people don't really know what a mutual fund is, the New York Times writers here have used an analogy of something familiar, such as the housing market, to explain that more complicated situation in a way that most people would understand. So it's important that you kind of act as translator when you're a media writer to help your audience really understand some of those more complicated terms. You're also going to want to use descriptions to let the audience picture what you mean. Now, descriptions can get tricky. Just as in the narrative style of writing, you have to make sure that you're being specific, objective, and neutral. We also want to avoid stereotypes and other terms that we might use regularly in our vernacular that we shouldn't, right? So we don't want to be describing someone that we wouldn't describe someone of a different minority category in a different way, right? Like your textbook provides the example of she has great legs. Would you really say that about a man? He has great legs? Probably not. So we shouldn't describe a woman that way. So here's an example from CNN from the 1-year anniversary of Parkland and how the survivors are going through that grief. So in the previous sentence that I cut off for space, we are given the story of this girl whose last name is Kaur, and she, so we get the description here. Kaur was taking a psychology test when the fire alarm went off. She evacuated to a garden where she heard what sounded like metal banging on metal. Now she knows the sound was gunshots. Loud banging still triggers her. She avoids crowds when possible, and when she's in public, she's on high alert, fearful that another shooting could break out. Do you have a sense of what the survivor is going through? Most of us have never been involved in a school shooting or a mass shooting and don't really know what that experience is like. But thanks to the description of the CNN writer, we kind of can put ourselves in her shoes even for a moment, which makes us relate to her and makes that information kind of jump off the page a little bit more. So now that you've understood how to get general story ideas through the use of news values, how to write a lead and second paragraph, how to use various styles of writing to make up your body, how to use transitions and examples, and gone over a lot of the AP style guidelines. Now it's your turn. We're going to begin writing full stories starting later this week and into next week. So I hope that you trust and have confidence that you can now write a full media story based on your skills. So the first attempt at that is going to be a peer feature story, which isn't due until October 9th. But there are many steps of generating a story that we'll go through step by step in order to get you used to how you write these stories. Now, typically we would be writing a single media story within a day or two, but I'm going to spread this assignment out over a few weeks so you get the feel and get a little bit more time to practice before you start having to do your general news stories by yourself. So for the peer feature story, I'm going to assign you a partner. You and that partner will work together on the project, but you're each writing your own individual stories. The way that you're working together is your partner has now become your source. They've become your feature. So you're going to write a feature story about how your fellow student is coping with COVID-19 and the fall semester. So we're all dealing with this pandemic and our stories are different. We're each handling it a different way. So based on that, you're going to draft interview questions. Then you'll interview your partner. You're going to write up the feature story. Your partner will edit the story you wrote about them, and you will edit their story. And then you'll take in their edits, revise it, and make a final peer feature story. And that's going to be your very first story that you've written for this class, which I think is so cool. So please know that I have the opportunity to send some of the best pieces to the campus media projects. So I will be picking out stories that I like the most and sending those to our campus-wide media. I will ask your permission first, but the reason I mention this is it's a great way to build your portfolio. So don't think about this just as a class assignment. This is something that can help build your career. So really put some time, creativity, and effort into it. So I have posted the full description of this assignment in this week's module for you to look over and review. However, the next module will go over that first part, the draft interview questions, in a little bit more detail. So each of these assignments will have their own assignment category in Canvas so that you're getting more information on each of these 5 pieces, but you have a broad overview of the assignment in this week's module. So now that we've talked about the rest of chapter 9, you're going to go into the discussion post and talk about the importance of objectivity as a news writer. And I hope you apply that objectivity to this peer feature story as well. Make sure you do your homework, which will be workbook chapter 9, exercise 1, and then we'll work on our AP hyphens homework. Before Friday's module, make sure that you read chapter 11, but you're only going to be reading certain pages from that to focus on how to begin interviewing.